This is admittedly anecdotal, but I've noticed a lot of people tend to focus on political, military, and social revolutions as being the most important events in human history. And it's completely speculative, but I think it's because we're able to put individual names and faces to those. The Glorious Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Protestant Reformation. There are key individuals that define those. But it is the economic revolutions that are all-encompassing, completely transformative of every part of society, and permanent. They're the ones that completely remake everything about society, and they include social, military, and political revolutions. They lead to them, in fact. Arguably, the most important revolution in history is the industrial revolutions. And there are many of them, but economic revolutions in general have a lot of key features. The industrial revolutions, specifically the first and the second industrial revolutions, will lead to revolutions in technology and innovation, and those lead to revolutions in productivity and efficiency, which include revolutions in energy and transportation and communication. It's the industrial revolutions that remake everything about society to create the modern world that we know today. Rising incomes, middle class, universal education, global communication, even all leisure activity, all comes from the industrial revolutions. And we will be looking at the first industrial revolution, which is centered in England, and the second industrial revolution, which is centered in the United States and Germany. Now, overriding this entire lecture, though, is one very important key that has been called the quote-unquote great fact. And that is, in spite of all the problems that come with industrialization, that come with globalization, that come with the rise of corporations, the world is a better place because of the industrial revolutions. There is unprecedented and exponential growth in productivity because of these. From the beginning of human existence, of recorded human existence, until we get to the 1820s, the mass of humans experienced almost zero growth, both in terms of their economic standing and their standard of living throughout their entire lives. There was very, very little change to individuals. And then, after nearly 2,000 years of economic stagnation, beginning in the early 1800s and really taking off in the 1850s, we will see a dramatic spike in world GDP that has continued to grow. And this will transform everything about everyone's lives. And again, for all of its problems, it overall is a positive thing. It will be overwhelmingly concentrated in the West, in specifically Western Europe and North America. And it is not until the latter part of the 20th century that it will also include China, India, and other parts of the world. So, the industrial revolutions are fundamentally important to understand. And they will start in England. So the first industrial revolution will start in England, somewhere in the 1700s. You can never put an exact date to this. But why exactly England? And there are several reasons, but fundamentally the biggest reasons are those three key institutions that we talked about before. Capitalism, a democratic form of government, which is a republic or representative democracy, and religious freedom. Those three things will lead to all sorts of other changes that will allow England to become the most industrialized and powerful country in the world. So, just a reminder, capitalism is an economic system that is characterized by private ownership of the means of production and distribution. So, an individual that is able to own their land and farm on it and reap the benefits of their labor, that is capitalism. Capitalism does not mean no government. Capitalism is an economic system that has a lot of flaws, but it is still the best economic system we found because it is predicated on competition. Competition means that there is going to be more technological and economic innovation. And so, as we saw in the Netherlands and in England, there's technological and economic innovation that makes those countries and then England into the world power, because a key feature of a capitalist system is you need to have capital. When we say capital, this means like capital and financial markets or institutions. Capital and finance, that's what the stock market is. That is where an individual is able to get capital or able to get money and resources in order to pursue their visions. It's how entrepreneurs are able to create businesses. And you cannot have a capitalist system without a banking system. They go together. Throughout the medieval period, there was some innovation, but it was generally from like kings paying people to try to invent, and that does not work as well as a true capitalist system where people from the bottom are able to invent stuff. And in order for there to be capital, there has to be a functioning banking system. Those things go together. And so that is why England will have the best economic system in the world, because they create the best financial system in the world. Again, they got this from the Netherlands, but they will create the most stable banking system in the world because they have the Bank of England, the first true central bank. So the Dutch had a central bank, but England will have the most comprehensive central bank. It's what the Federal Reserve is today. And we are living in a period where a lot of people dislike the Federal Reserve. There are things to criticize about it. But if you see what the world looks like without a central bank, which the United States actually tried twice, once during the War of 1812, we let it expire in 1811 and the country went bankrupt. And then after Andrew Jackson, we got rid of it again, and it was a disaster. So you cannot have a functioning banking system without a central bank, and you cannot have a capitalist system without a banking system. So that is the first reason England will be the center of the Industrial Revolution, is because they have capitalism, they have capital, and they have a banking system. Second reason is England, as we've discussed before, they have this Goldilocks form of government. The Netherlands had created a government that was too decentralized. There was not enough central authority. Without enough centralization, there is not enough stability because there's not enough power. Most governments throughout human history have too much central government. The government has too much power. England found this nice balance, this Goldilocks zone where there was strong central government, there was a king, there was a parliament, there is a prime minister, but there is a representative legislature. And you need to have a strong, stable government, but not too strong. Because you need to have, for a capitalist system to work, you need to have this right balance of public and private partnership. By public, it means government owned. By private, that means privately owned, owned by individuals. These two things have to go together. And they have to go together for all sorts of reasons. But one of the big ones, and this is a novelty in human history, is in order to enforce property rights. If you are going to have an entrepreneur, if you're going to have an inventor, someone that's going to create something, they need to have proper incentive. And that incentive is they need to think they're going to benefit from their invention. If you look all over the world, you look at places that do not have a strong central government, like Morocco, Afghanistan, then there's no point in inventing something, because then a stronger tribe will just take whatever you invent, and so you won't get the benefits of it. There are plenty of places where there's too strong of a central government, where if you invent something and the government decides it wants it, it'll just take it, like China, Russia, or there's a place like Mexico where if you invent something, there is a very good chance a drug cartel will just take it. So you have to have the right amount of government in order to ensure individual property rights. And England will have that, especially with the the creation of a patent office. Patent offices are, when you invent something, you send it to a patent office, and then the patent office says you have a monopoly on this product for a certain period of time. So in England, when they created the patent office, it rewarded inventors with a patent for 14 years. You don't want to give it to them indefinitely, but this allowed individuals to know that they would reap the benefits of their invention. So it is one of the most fundamentally important parts of any government is to ensure property rights. And the other reason England's government was the perfect, or not perfect, reached that Goldilocks zone is so it had enough centralized power to allow property rights, but it kept developing democratically. It kept becoming more and more politically pluralistic. Remember, pluralism doesn't mean everyone gets along kumbaya. It means that there are so many different factions that no one group can dominate, because it doesn't matter what party it is. It doesn't matter what political ideology. If any one group gets too much power, then they'll corrupt the entire system. They'll start passing laws that only benefit themselves economically, and then it messes up the capitalist system, and then that eventually messes up the democratic system. It usually messes up religious freedom, so you have a downward spiral. England will develop more and more as a democratic government, and this happens over time. As we saw with the French Revolution, if it's too much change too quickly, that's not a good thing. And so England will develop over time, and it's not like this is also a clean process. Just like in the United States, it won't be. It takes a lot of fighting and a lot of headache. And there will be all sorts of protests in England that will lead them to pass what's called the Reform Act of 1832. Now, this does a lot of things, but fundamentally what it does is it changes England's electoral system to make the parliament more representative by making it more inclusive, by giving the right to vote to more people. Now, this is a small step because obviously it explicitly said, but no women. So they actually went out of their way to say that women still didn't have the right to vote and wouldn't get the right to vote for quite a while. But it did make it more inclusive for middle-class men. So it will, after this, only 1 in 5 adult males can vote. So that's 20% of the population. But that is still a dramatic increase compared to most places in the world, and this will only continue to grow. But we have seen many examples of what happens when you try to instill democracy on a country that has never had it before, like what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. That doesn't go well. This is a process. It has to be a gradual process. Otherwise, it historically is too disruptive. So there will be the right amount of government. Well, there's no perfect right amount of government because it changes over time, but it will be a strong central government, but it'll also be a pluralistic government. That will allow for public-private coordination, public-private interaction, which will lead to the third major reason England will be the global power, and as we've mentioned before, globalization. England will have the best navy in the world, which will allow for more trade, commerce, and in order for any society to be able to be a world power, it has to have transportation and communication. It has to be able to exchange information and products rapidly and efficiently. So there is a very good reason that when you look at the history of eras of globalization and eras of economic revolution, they tend to go together. They inevitably go together. So England will dominate the first industrial revolution because it has the best navy and it's able to globalize the best. So again, since as we've seen, the country that is able to adapt to globalization the best is the one that becomes the most powerful economically. So the third major reason is England was able to globalize. Fourth reason is England was able to have a pluralistic system. Now, this meant, at the time it was pluralism in terms of religion. And religious freedom and religious pluralism is essential in order to have a scientific revolution. And you need a scientific revolution in order to have innovators that can innovate and create new technology and new business, new inventions without the fear of retribution. There are just too many cases in human history of scientists inventing something and then being told, you are not allowed to say the Earth is not the center of the universe, for example. So you need to have a pluralistic society in order to allow science so that science can create more innovation in technology and business. And England had one of the most pluralistic societies at the time. So there was scientific rationalism and revolution that allowed for the invention of new technology. And fifth, and finally, which is related to that, England also had a lot of immigrants. Now, there are problems with immigration, and if it is uncontrolled, that leads to problems. But immigration is absolutely essential for any society to grow and advance. The new immigrants bring in new ideas, and England, because it had religious freedom and religious toleration and was pluralistic, it became the center of where immigrants would come to. And this is vitally important for nations to grow. A lot of immigration always goes along. When there's a really good economy, when there's an economic revolution, immigration is a key part of that. So for all these reasons, England will become the center of the first industrial revolution. And there are so many examples, but I will just focus on a couple of them. one of the very first inventions of the Industrial Revolution. It's called the flying shuttle. And this was actually invented in France, but French officials destroyed and banned it. Why would they do that? Because, as we've seen before, when there's a new invention, it leads to creative destruction. And then it leads to individuals becoming economically more powerful. And when there are businessmen that are becoming economically wealthier, they want more political power. And so it's always a challenge to the person in charge, to whoever the dictator is. That's why there is a perverse logic to dictatorships in order to suppress innovation and suppress knowledge. So this will come to England, and England is the one that will first set up the first flying shuttles, or first invention of flying shuttles en masse, which the name doesn't make it sound like it, but is involved in speeding up the weaving process or increasing the productivity of textiles. And when you say textiles, textiles is turning raw material like cotton, wool, silk into clothing. This may not seem like a big deal, but the first Industrial Revolution, textile industry was the dominant, one of the dominant industries in it. It was absolutely fundamental, and it changed everything about society. And I'll just give you one example of how it did that, because again, with economic revolutions, there's so many ways it changes society. It's impossible to explain them all. But for the majority of women and girls, making clothes was the majority of their existence. For a family of 6, it required 7 hours per day for women and girls to make clothing before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution will change that. Instead of spending 7 hours per day, all of a sudden now women and girls have more time to do other things. So there will be industrial textile factories where people will go to work, predominantly women. And there's obviously problems with the textile industry and manufacturing in general, which we'll talk about more later. But it's still a better existence than 7 hours a day working in your house, making clothes for your family. So textiles are a fundamental part of the first Industrial Revolution. Another key invention of the Industrial Revolution, first Industrial Revolution, is the steam engine. Steam engine is a new form of both energy and transportation. So this is centered in England because England has a lot of coal. You burn coal, coal boils water, that water produces steam, steam produces motion, and that is how you get a steam engine. Steam engines will unlock energy and power in thousands and thousands of ways. A lot of textile manufacturing was based on using steam engines. And steam engines will fuel, again, so many different other industries that it's impossible to list them all. Just one other one that's related to it was locomotives, which eventually become railroads. The very first steam-powered locomotive was created in England. And it, even with how old it looked, it had 1,300 horsepower, which you're replacing 1,300 horses with the first steam-powered locomotive, which obviously that is a massive improvement rather than relying on 1,300 horses. So England will invent the first locomotive, and it will have the first railroad by 1825. And by 1914, it'll have 20,000 miles of railroad, which will connect the entire country, which is essential for an advanced economy as it national transportation system. These are just a couple of examples of inventions, but there are so many more that can't possibly go into them all. And I just can't stress enough how revolutionary this was. It will change, again, everything about women's life and everything about transportation. It unlocks all human potential against biology and geography. So, like, we were limited by the amount of power a horse could use and a human could use, but that will be broken. Fun fact, between Jesus Christ and Thomas Jefferson, there was no major advances in transportation, no massive change in land transportation. It was limited by what a horse could do. After 1825, transportation will continuously explode, and the speed of it will constantly get bigger and better and more significant. So the world will just have a huge change because of the first industrial revolution. Now, this isn't to say that it was all roses and sunshine, because it wasn't. Obviously, there was a lot of exploitation that took place. This is important to understand. During the early phases of every economic revolution, there is always exploitation, because society takes a while to take on the economic revolution, and then to adopt policies to regulate the new industries, the new technology, the new inventions. So, like we mentioned with textiles, women will be abused horribly, and in all sorts of industries, people are abused at the beginning of economic revolutions. Technological progress leads to massive change, and massive change leads to instability and confusion. So, important thing to keep in mind, I've mentioned it before and I will mention it again, when there's a lot of change also, and there's a lot of technological progress, there's economic progress, there is always an emphasis on identity politics. And the identity politics will change. Sometimes it's religion. In the case of England, during the first Industrial Revolution, it was the Irish. Damn Irish. The Tories in particular, they called themselves the Conservatives. I'm not giving them that title. They were the conservative politicians. They used anti-populist and anti-Catholic rhetoric to scare workers. So they would scare British workers and say it's those Irish and those Catholic that are Irish and Catholic immigrants that are responsible for the low wages. In reality, it's just the business owners not wanting to pay workers more because they want to make more money. But blaming it on the Irish worked incredibly well. It wasn't the Irish's fault, but, it's one of the consistent themes throughout human existence is the very wealthy manipulating the people that they are screwing over economically by pitting them against each other based on race, ethnicity, religion, or today, gender. It is so consistent throughout human history. There were problems, but the fact is, the Industrial Revolution made life better for the overwhelming majority of individuals in England. It will make England into the dominant economic force, and it will increase standard of living for the vast majority of the population. From 1770 to 1870, wages will rise by 50%. That is adjusted for inflation and cost of living. So over 100 years, people's average wages went up 50%. So that is massive when you look at the scope of human existence. That is also why England will invent some of the very first leisure activities that we know today, such as they will bring back popular sports that had been big in the Roman Empire, but they will make popular sports into a thing again. And also, they will even invent the first travel agents and traveling for leisure. So everything about leisure activity will stem from the British. And British will become the world superpower. After 1815, and at the end of the French Revolution, England becomes the world hyperpower, or what the United States will be after World War II. This is the heyday of British industrialization and the British Empire. And during this period, England will control 1/4 of the Earth's surface. And more than 1/4 of all humans will live under British rule. Now, there is a tendency to say that England only became the world superpower because of imperialism and conquest. That is not accurate. Obviously, it will help England, but even after 1945, when England loses all of its colonies, its economy will actually grow faster. And there were other places in the world during this period that will conquer other territories, notably Russia and China, that will not experience massive economic growth because those places did not have those basic institutions that will allow England to become the global political, economic, and social and cultural model. It will rule the seas and control international trade. English will become the global language. The British pound will be the global currency, and England will dominate until its practices and its policies will spread to its former colony, the United States, which will take up the mantle